Hi. My name's Erica. And last Christmas my parents looked me straight in the eye and told me I was no longer part of the family. No seat at the table. No name in the will. My sister just smirked like it was long overdue. I thought it couldn't get worse, until I found out they'd signed everything away behind my back months ago. But what none of them knew was that I never came to dinner empty-handed. The snow had been falling since late afternoon, brushing the street lights in a soft glow. My tires crunched slowly over familiar roads, every turn pressing down on my chest. That house, my parents' house, looked just the same as it did years ago. Perfect, at least from the curb. Warm lights framed the windows. Shadows moved inside. Laughter, maybe. It should have comforted me. But it didn't. I parked, cut the engine, and sat still, hands on the wheel. No one was waiting for me. They never did. I was the one who left, college out of state, job in the city, a life far from these manicured lawns and frozen driveways. Grace stayed. She always stayed. Always knew how to play the game. The door opened before I could knock. My mother, Isadora, stood there like she'd been watching from the window, a smile tight enough to snap. "You're late." I stepped in, shook off the snow. The smell of cinnamon and turkey hit me like a wall, familiar, but not welcoming. My father, Martin, barely looked up from his phone, muttering, "Merry Christmas, kid." Grace was already seated, wine glass in hand, legs crossed like she was posing for a photo. "Well, look who's finally decided to remember the family." I smiled politely, nodded. Inside, I was already scanning the room for an exit. They say you can never go home again. Sometimes, going home just means walking back into the courtroom. Isadora looked elegant as ever. She always dressed for control, pearls, pressed blouse, heels even at home. Her tone carried the same chill as the weather outside. Martin played his usual role, invisible. Hidden behind a screen, or a paper, or silence. Grace had grown bolder with the years, more smug, more polished, like she finally absorbed every ounce of power our mother bestowed on her. I tried talking about the drive-in. About the snow. Anything to bridge the gap. But Grace cut me off every time, hijacking the conversation with updates on the local HOA or how the neighborhood finally installed the security gate she'd petitioned for. Isadora nodded at every word like gospel. It felt like I was sitting at a table where my chair had never really existed. Dinner began. Roast, stuffing, glazed carrots. Perfect, sterile, silent. And then I said it. I wanted to share something. Knives paused mid-cut. Forks hovered. "I'm pregnant." The words hit the air and just froze. Grace's mouth curled. Isadora's eyes narrowed. "With who?" Her voice was sharp. Not curious. Accusing. I cleared my throat. "It's not about who. I'm not asking for anything. I just thought you'd want to know." Grace gave a short laugh. "How generous of you." Isadora set her fork down carefully. "Erica, we have cleaned up after enough of your decisions." No congratulations. No smile. Just judgment, wrapped in holiday linen. But I didn't cry. I'd done that enough growing up. Then it came, the knife I didn't see coming. "You're not in the will anymore," my mother said flatly. "You made your choices. Live with them." The room spun slightly. I locked eyes with Martin. He looked down, cowardly, as always. I forced a breath. Forced a smile. "Well then. This dinner must be a celebration of independence." Grace raised her glass, smirking. "Freedom's expensive." My hand found a small wooden box in my coat pocket. I placed it gently on the table. The old music box, worn but clean. My mother had given it to me when I was 10. She probably didn't remember. "That's fine." "I brought a gift," I said quietly. "Might not mean anything now." They stared, confused. I didn't explain. They didn't ask. I stood. "Thanks for dinner." No one moved. I picked up my coat, turned for the door. The cold wrapped around me as I stepped outside, but I didn't shiver. I didn't look back. They thought they'd erased me, but that night, they unknowingly signed over everything that was truly mine. The wind hit different that morning. I walked through the heart of downtown, boots crunching against slushy sidewalks, hands shoved deep in my coat pockets. The streets were mostly quiet. Christmas Day had that odd stillness, but here and there, pockets of joy bloomed like little defiant fires. Families holding hands. Laughter spilling out of diners. A kid chasing pigeons with a candy cane clenched between his teeth. The world hadn't ended last night. Just mine. I found myself outside an old 24-hour diner I used to stop at after long shifts back in school. The neon still buzzed in the window like it always had. I went in, ordered a coffee I didn't need, and slid into a booth by the window. Across from me sat a woman and her daughter, maybe 6 or 7. They were splitting a stack of pancakes, laughing over syrup accidents and whipped cream mustaches. I looked down at my hands, wrapped around the warm mug, and thought, some people get Christmas miracles. Some of us get clarity. Last night played on a loop. My mother's words. Grace's smirk. That music box sitting like a silent witness on the table. I had left without slamming the door. I hadn't needed to. The silence I carried out with me said more than any raised voice could. Back on the street, I walked without a plan. My feet took me through neighborhoods I once dreamed of living in. Somewhere along the way, memory pulled me under. Not the obvious ones, holidays, birthdays, the loud stuff. No, it was the quiet ones that cut deepest. I remembered being 16, getting invited to help in the kitchen while Grace sat with the adults in the dining room, wine glass in hand like she belonged there. I remembered how every time I had an opinion, my mother would blink slow and say, "Let the grown-ups talk." Grace never heard that phrase. Not once. Then there was that scholarship. The one I worked for, bled for. Full ride. It vanished. No explanation. Just a letter saying the offer had been withdrawn. At the time, I thought it was a glitch, bad luck. But I remember the timing now. The hush around the dinner table. My mother's distracted glance. Grace avoiding eye contact. They didn't want me to succeed on my own. They wanted me to need them. Need their money, their approval, their crumbs. If I stood on my own, what power would they have left? That thought stayed with me all the way to South Halstead, where I found myself buzzed into a small legal clinic above a dry cleaner. I hadn't called ahead. I just hoped she'd be there, Allie, an old friend from college who had always had more brains than patience. Thankfully, she was working a holiday shift. We hugged quickly, the kind you give when you're holding back tears and not sure why. She poured me tea, asked me what was wrong. I didn't plan to say much. But when I mentioned the trust in my family, her face changed. "Grace Fairbanks?" she asked carefully. "She reached out here once. A few years back." I blinked. "What?" She used a different name, but it was obvious. She wanted paperwork about beneficiary rights tied to a private family trust. Wanted to know how to sever someone's access before they turned 30. I didn't handle it, but I remember. It raised red flags. My throat went dry. So it wasn't just dinner. It wasn't just the will. It was a setup. A years-long play designed to cut me out, quietly and clean. My mother, with her rehearsed cruelty. My sister, with her fake warmth and silent knives. And me, sitting there every holiday, thinking I was lucky just to be tolerated. It wasn't just their judgment I was eating at dinner, it was a carefully plated deception. I walked out of that clinic heavier than I went in. But something in me had shifted. Grief is strange. We usually associate it with death. But mourning the living, mourning the people who are still breathing but have chosen to erase you, that's a different beast. I stood by the lake, watching the water roll in slow waves. I thought about the baby growing inside me. About how I'd tell them this story one day, not as a tragedy, but as a warning. About how people will try to define your worth when they're afraid of losing control. I pulled out my phone, typed a message to Grace, "Congratulations. You won. I hope it's enough." Then I blocked her. Done pretending. Done playing. I was halfway through turning the phone off when the voicemail pinged. "Miss Erica Fairbanks? This is Mr. Halford, building manager at Lakeside Commercial Plaza. Your mother signed over something recently tied to your name. I just need to verify your mailing address." I stared at the screen. My fingers cold, not from the wind. Whatever it was, she thought it belonged to her. She was wrong. Monday mornings always hit different, but that one it carried the weight of silence. The holidays were gone. The glitter, the pretending, the forced smiles over dry turkey and cold casseroles, all behind me. I unlocked my office door, pushed through the chill, and paused. The space smelled like old paper and stale coffee, but it was mine. No marble floors, no antique lamps, No staff scurrying to serve tea. Just a desk, a chair that leaned to the left, and a shelf with a music box I hadn't dared open since Christmas Eve. I dropped my coat, booted the laptop, and stared at the blinking cursor. Fairbanks Trust folder sat right where I left it years ago. I hovered. Then clicked. They said I was independent, I muttered. They meant I was disposable. The city hummed outside, cars honking, people moving like clockwork. But inside, it was still. The phone rang. Ava Tran. College friend turned nonprofit paralegal. Smart, thorough, loyal to the point of nosy. Erica, she said. I didn't mean to disturb, but I found something. You'll want to see it. Her voice wasn't casual. It was the tone people use when they don't know how to say the worst part. I was cross-referencing old estate consultations from my last firm. Your sister Grace reached out to us. I froze. About what? She wanted help drafting a document, transfer of holdings for the Fairbanks estate. Something about minimizing contestation. The phrasing was deliberate. She never said a word. I figured. I emailed it to you. Check your inbox. I stared at the screen. A new email blinked in. Attachment, confidential request, Fairbanks Family Holdings Review. My pulse picked up. I opened it. Grace's name, clear in the header. 5 years ago. Same email she still used. I scrolled. Legalese. Definitions. More legalese. Then, buried in a sub-clause, recommendation to restructure shares excluding youngest daughter. That line cut deeper than I expected. Not protect. Exclude. My hand tightened on the mouse. I didn't blink. I read it again. They didn't just forget me. They planned it. Years in advance. I remembered every time Grace was praised while I was ushered to the side. Let your sister handle it, Erica. She's more equipped. I didn't understand it then. But now I did. This wasn't neglect. It was strategy. I sat back, breathing through the sting. Not crying. Not yelling. Just seeing it, finally, for what it was. And I knew right then, I wasn't going to let it end that way. I grabbed my coat again and walked. Not aimless, toward the lake. The wind slapped me awake. Sharp. Honest. I replayed Mom's words from that night, her voice flat, as if reading a grocery list. You're not part of the will anymore. And I'd said nothing. But now, I whispered, you thought I'd shrink. I won't. I pulled out my phone. Typed fast, good job. You found what you wanted. Now I'm working on what I deserve. Sent it to Grace without hesitation. No anger in me. Just a shift. I made my way back. Snow dusted the sidewalk. The sun had dropped low, and shadows spilled across the carpet as I unlocked the office door again. I froze. There was an envelope on my desk. No stamps. No markings, except the Fairbanks monogram. I approached it slowly, heart pounding harder than before. Opened it. Inside, a single sheet. Deed transfer form. My name. Crossed out in red ink. The message was clear. I didn't panic. I didn't crumble. I picked up the phone and called Ava. We need to meet, I said. When? Right now. My eyes locked on the red line slashing through my name. They didn't just erase me, I said aloud. They drew a map to the battlefield. And I was done standing outside the fight. It was Grace who texted. Family wants to talk. Nothing big. Just an update. An update. Like I was a stakeholder in a quarterly earnings call instead of a daughter being summoned back into a house that no longer remembered how to say my name without tightening its jaw. Still, I said yes. Polite. Controlled. That old instinct kicking in, don't give them more reason to call you difficult. The drive out felt longer than it used to. Snow layered the streets like someone trying to cover up bad memories. By the time I turned onto the old circular driveway, the sky had started to gray. Front porch, same chimes, same crack in the third step. But something in the air felt hollow. Like the walls inside knew I wasn't welcome anymore, and were just waiting to play along. I opened the door and immediately saw them, all seated already. Mom at the head, Dad to her right, Grace directly across. My place? Far end. Small plate, different napkin. It wasn't a mistake. It was set that way. I sat without a word. A memory surfaced, my 8th grade science fair. Grace got first place. Mom leaned in that night and said, maybe next year don't spread yourself so thin. Back then, I thought it was encouragement. Now I know better. Dad cleared his throat. Well, we just wanted things to be clear, moving forward. Grace handed out folders. Labeled. Indexed. Prepared like a corporate boardroom. My name on mine. Misspelled. She started talking. About asset preservation. About inheritance streams. About simplifying responsibilities. All in that soft, efficient voice of hers. Like she was reading off a flight manifest. I scanned the pages. Minutes from meetings. Quarterly updates. Investment shifts. Legal memos. I hadn't been told about any of it. I looked up, tried to say something. Just a breath. Mom cut me off, one hand lifted. Let's not get emotional, Erica. That landed like a slap. No yelling. No drama. Just a kind of surgical detachment that hurt worse. Inside that folder, second to last page, I saw it. Fairbanks Legacy Trust Amendment. Clear language, all holdings, save for non-participatory members. My name was in the footnote. Under asterisks. Like a discarded term from a user agreement. I wasn't written out. I was buried. I looked at Grace. She didn't smirk. Didn't flinch. Just nodded slightly, like she'd done her duty. I could feel my fingers trembling, not from grief. From trying not to flip the table. Dad spoke low. You walked away, Erica. We're just responding accordingly. I closed the folder, stood up, looked each of them in the eye and said, I appreciate the clarification. I turned to go. Dad added behind me, almost like a final jab, you made your choices. I paused. Then said, steady, so did you. And I'll respond in kind. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. But the silence I left in that room, it rattled more than if I'd screamed. You don't light a match and blame the fire for burning back. By the time I reached the car, the sky had dimmed. I let the engine warm up. My phone buzzed. Ava. Text, the bank just confirmed an old power of attorney switch. Not what we expected. I stared at the screen, heart pounding in a new rhythm now. I texted back, they've drawn their line. Now I'll draw mine. I dropped the phone in the passenger seat, looked out at the snow-covered yard, same one where I used to play in boots 2 sizes too big. And I whispered, steady as stone, they thought they wrote me out. But I'm writing the next chapter. The envelope came in thick ivory paper, gold embossed seal. It looked like an honor. It felt like bait. Fairbanks Foundation Annual Charity Gala. Formal attire. RSVP requested. My name printed clean in cursive at the top, like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't been erased. Like they hadn't drawn a line and pushed me out of it. Ava stared at it over coffee. You're not seriously considering going? They want a picture, I said. To show the world nothing's wrong. That we're just one big happy pile of endowments and crystal stemware. She raised an eyebrow. Then why feed their game? I smiled, cold. Because sometimes the best way to show rot is under their spotlight. That night, I laid out a dress I hadn't worn in years, black, no frills. Just edges. Nothing soft. I wasn't going there to blend in. I was going to stand out, for once, on my own terms. The night of the gala, I walked in alone. The hotel ballroom shimmered in gold and white, waiters weaving through with silver trays, laughter rising like steam from a pot ready to boil. I saw my father first. His smile flickered, recognition, then restraint. Well, you look sharp. My mother kissed the air near my cheek. So glad you made it. You've always belonged here. Grace approached, drink in hand. Can we talk, just us? I met her eyes and said, I'm not here to whisper. She blinked. That was enough. The ballroom was layered in portraits of legacy, photos of past galas, headlines about awards, quotes from my father on philanthropy. I scanned the program booklet. My name wasn't on a single page. Not even under initiatives I had created with my own hands. It wasn't just my seat they took, I whispered to myself. They tried to write me out of history. Dinner moved slow. Speeches started. My jaw clenched every time they said family vision. Every time Grace used words like continuity, honor, unbroken legacy. Then came the question. One of the board members, a woman I used to mentor, stood up, smiling. Erica, any updates on the women's initiative this year? I looked across the room. A mic was passed to me. I stood, took the mic, and said, I no longer represent this foundation. But I'll speak truth tonight, not out of bitterness, but as the one who built what they chose to forget. Heads turned. Cutlery stopped clinking. I started that program with a laptop in a basement office while the rest of you were buying nameplates. I secured the first 3 grants myself, while my name was already being taken off future proposals. Silence. I was removed from meetings I built. Funds I secured were redirected without a word. And still, I'm told to smile for the cameras. Not tonight. Applause came slowly. Then faster. My mother dropped her glass. It shattered, but no one flinched. I didn't wait. I nodded at the few faces I trusted. And walked out. The air outside was crisp. Ava met me near the valet line. She wrapped me in her hug and said, "You just gave every silenced daughter in that room a voice." I didn't say thank you. I just breathed deep. Steady. "No more seat at their table," I said. "I'm building my own." That night, I slept like someone who'd finally stopped asking for permission. The next morning, the retaliation arrived. Email. From the board. Reviewing your access to all projects under the foundation. Attached, a letter filed by Grace. She had moved to take full control of the women's initiative. Citing family protection rights. My hands stayed still on the keyboard. They wanted war. Fine. But I wouldn't fight with tears. I'd answer with proof. I arrived early that morning. The office was quiet, too quiet. I didn't dive into the usual routine. Instead I sat behind my desk, the music box ticking softly on the shelf, echoing like a heartbeat in the stillness. The fallout from the gala still pressed on me, polite smiles framing betrayal, applause stifling truth. I let the silence settle. Let it remind me of the cold looks during dinner, of my mother's eyes cutting through the broom of shimmer and faux gratitude. I picked up the music box, wound it once, and listened to the tiny melody. I told myself, they wrote me out of the will. Now I'll write a new legacy. I opened the file Ava sent. It was time. The PDF sat on screen, the header in crisp type, Fairbanks Legacy Trust Amendment. I leaned in, reading names, dates, signatures. Grace's name underlined. The date, September, 2 years ago. I scrolled through document after document, minutes of board meetings I never attended, conferences I was never invited to, tip memos signed without my knowledge. My phone buzzed. Ava's text, "I found something else. We need to review real signatures." I exhaled slowly. My career in nonprofit consulting had kept me busy. I'd assumed the silence meant neglect. Now I knew it hid a strategy. I opened a spreadsheet, listed dates, relocations, trust transfers. I realized how my absence from family dinners, my move to Chicago, my independence, they used it to erase me. Not by accident. By design. Then the letter arrived. Formal. Letterhead of the estate attorney. "A meeting between parties is in everyone's best interest," it read. I read it 3 times. I could already see the setup, a conference where I'd be pressured to sign something new. Another scene of family unity with legal undertones. I stood in front of the mirror, buttoned the blazer I never wore out, recalled the quote I once carried, "Courage doesn't roar." Sometimes it's the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, "I'll try again tomorrow." I nodded to myself. I would attend. On my terms. At the conference room I walked in, suit fitted, posture straight. The portraits of my grandfather loomed, his face stern, legacy bright. My parents seated at the long table. Grace to my side. The air smelled of polished wood and expectation. I opened the folder I brought, hundreds of pages. Neat bound. The first document inside, exclusion of non-participatory members. My name, there. Clear. The clause, all holdings, save for non-participatory members. Non-participatory. Not inadvertent. Intentional. I looked at my mother whose lips pressed thinner. I looked at my father whose gaze avoided mine. I collected my voice. "This isn't correction," I said. "It's erasure. Let's not pretend otherwise." For the first time, I didn't collapse into tears or excuses. I stood. I owned the moment. I placed the folder gently on the table and rose. "I'm not signing anything today. Because I already signed mine, my name, my work, my future." The door clicked behind me. I heard Grace whisper, "You'll regret this." I didn't halt. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I walked out. The hall felt narrower than before. But my shoulders were straighter. I pushed open the door to the lobby and stepped into the crisp air of late March. The city smelled like thawing pavement and honest beginnings. I didn't look back. The early morning light that filtered into the courthouse lobby felt colder than the wind outside. I walked in with a new suit, navy, tailored, and tried to steady the rhythm of my steps. I reminded myself quietly, they gave me a seat at the table only so I'd keep quiet. The marble floors echoed each footfall. Around me, people argued for rights, for money, for acknowledgement. I waited in the gallery, heart steadying. My phone buzzed, Ava's text. They filed a motion. You're being dragged into it. I folded the message, kept my expression blank. This was what I'd been building toward, reclaiming space by showing up. Courtroom 5B. I exhaled then entered. Inside, everything shifted. The judge reviewed the motion. Petitioner Erica Fairbanks must cease all activity associated with Fairbanks Women's Initiative pending full review of trust status. The words punched hard. I felt the walls press closer. This wasn't just a move, it was a strike. Their lawyer spoke with quiet precision, citing the amended trust documents. My jaw clenched. I glanced at the gallery. Grace sat motionless, my mother's gaze narrowed, cold as winter. My hand slipped into my purse, fingers closing over the printed amendment I kept. They wanted to silence me. But all I felt was resolve. Because I'd already looked at the proof. This wasn't surprise, it was expected. And I was ready. After the hearing I was summoned to a board meeting at the family estate headquarters. The building's hallway was lined with portraits of our legacy, my grandfather's serious face hanging above. My own image? Missing. I felt that omission like a cut. At the table, the board members sat stiffly. Grace spoke first, we must protect the brand and legacy our grandfather built. Her voice crisp. I replied calmly, he built it for all his children, not just the ones he approved of. My words hung, heavy with meaning. The room went silent except for the slow tick of a clock somewhere in the corner. That image of a missing portrait? It hit me, when your name is missing from the wall, you draw yourself into the frame. The meeting ended with the estate's attorney sliding a letter across the table. We will seek injunctive relief against any unauthorized use of the Fairbanks Foundation name. I felt the chairs shift behind me. Grace gave a nod like she'd checked a box. This was no longer whispering at the edges. It was war in boardroom white. My heartbeat raced then steadied. I picked up the letter and looked at the attorney. Step 1 of my plan, I said softly, just became your step 1. The briefcase snapped shut. Gavel or not, I was ready. Back in the car, the city lights blurred through the windshield. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the wooden music box. I placed it on the passenger seat, letting that familiar tick remind me of where I came from and what I stood for. I texted Ava, tomorrow they'll wake up differently. Then I turned the key and drove away into the night, the engine humming steady under the Chicago sky. They issued their threat in boardroom white, tomorrow I'd answer with a hammer they never saw coming. I stepped into the glass-walled conference room of the law firm just after noon. The cameras were already rolling. Lights above me glinted off the piano black floor. I chose my spot at the podium, facing a sea of shifting lenses and notebooks. My lawyer gave me a quiet nod, this is the moment they can't cancel. And I believed it. I felt a tug of something I haven't felt in months, purpose. The overhead lighting left the spring day outside in shadow, inside, everything looked sharper. Reporters lined the sides, my family's PR team lingered in the back, smirking like they owned the theater. I looked at them, then at the audience, and thought, I was erased, but now I stand in the spotlight they built. When I took the microphone, the room stilled. I explained how the Fairbanks Legacy Trust Amendment omitted my name entirely and reassigned credit for my work to others. I held up large scanned images, signatures, timestamps, hidden clauses. The rustle among the press was quiet at first, then grew. Flashbulbs popped. My mother flinched. Grace's expression hardened, sharp-edged. I said, you didn't just cut me off, you rewrote my history. The words carried. I announced legal action. I named board members complicit. I watched as the well-rehearsed facade faltered. Reporters scribbled. The world leaned in. I felt vindicated. I'd turned my hurt into air. Stillness followed. The hush deepened like the moment before thunder. Reporters exchanged whispers. My father left early, muttering something about family reputation. Grace stood motionless, body rigid. Friends from the firm stepped forward quietly, offering support, financial, legal, moral. I felt chains snapping around me, each link a click of freedom. I turned, walked toward the exit, leaving microphones buzzing in my wake. I didn't hurry. I didn't look back. My steps were deliberate. I was walking away not as the daughter they ignored, but as the one they must notice. That evening, I watched the news at home. Headlines blazed: daughter takes on dynasty, Fairbanks scandal? Grace appeared in a live interview, a perfectly composed woman denying every accusation, eyes glancing aside when my name came up. I leaned forward, saw her lips purse when she forced a smile. My phone buzzed. I placed the music box, the one I carried through all this, on the table beside me. I whispered, I didn't just expose their secret. Now we're playing by different rules. The public heard my voice. Now I wait to see whose silence echoes next. The courthouse steps were still damp from the morning dew when I got there. Chicago hadn't fully woken up yet, just a handful of joggers in Grant Park, traffic still light. I sat in the gallery as the judge entered. The weight of every file, every late-night email, every buried clause we'd uncovered, sat right there with me. My lawyer leaned over, whispered without looking at me, it's on the record. Your name goes back on the trust. I didn't cry. Not then. I just breathed, deep, full. The kind of breath you forget how to take when you're constantly holding everything in. Across the aisle, I saw my father. His shoulders had that defeated tilt I remembered seeing once, years ago, after a failed deal. Grace didn't flinch, but her face. She looked tired. And for once, not proud of it. The judge's voice was steady, formal. The exclusion clause in the amended trust is reversed. Ms. Erica Fairbanks is restored to her rightful position. I didn't hear the rest. I just closed my eyes for one beat. Then I opened them, sat straighter, and thought, I refuse to be reduced by it. Later that afternoon, I drove to the estate. There was an informal gathering in the garden. I saw the press hovering near the gates, but they weren't allowed inside. Inside, the garden looked like it always did, manicured, symmetrical, too perfect to feel real. My mother found me near the roses. Erica, she began, hesitating, your grandfather would have been proud. I nodded once. Not a smile. Not a cold glare either. Just truth. That's all I could offer her. Truth is, I don't know if he would have been. But she needed to believe it, so I let it stand. Grace stood off to the side with our half-siblings. They whispered like they always did. I walked past them without flinching, turned just enough to say, I'm here now. No accusation. No apology. Just a fact. The only one that mattered. Legacy isn't given. It's claimed. And that day, I claimed mine. By evening, I was back in my home office. The air smelled like old paper and coffee. I reached over to the passenger seat and grabbed the wooden music box again. It had been with me through all of this. The ticking wasn't about time running out anymore, it sounded like persistence. Like something steady, unbreakable. I opened a blank document on my laptop and began to type, to the next generation of Fairbanks women, we build together. Then I called Dava. Told her it was time. We'd launch the Erica Fairbanks Initiative for Family Philanthropy next month. I wasn't going to inherit a legacy anymore. I was going to build one that fit. As the screen dimmed and the lamp glowed soft over the desk, I sat with one last thought, when everything goes to hell, the people who stand by you without flinching, they are your family. I stood up. Walked over to the window. Looked out at the city lights flickering like scattered stars. And I knew, I didn't just walk out of that boardroom a daughter reborn. I walked into tomorrow as the architect of my own chapter.